I'm looking forward to this very much, the conversation today. I first met Jan at the Berlin Film Market back in 1991, shortly after the very first public screening ever of my very first movie. Three sales agents were really interested in it. Two of them were like the biggest at the time. I met with them. They were like over the top enthusiastic and made all these promises. And then people told me about this guy, Jan Rofekamp, and Films Transit, and that I should meet with him, and we did. And he just, very quietly said, "I think I can do quite well with your film." And I thought, if it doesn't like sell well, enthusiasm can die quickly, but I liked, the idea of, quiet and steady and quiet confidence. And indeed, it did quite well. And he's done quite well. Films Transit was like, probably the leading international sales agency of for the past, 40 years.
Minus five.
Minus 35 years?
Yeah, because the last couple of years I've been less active in the sales business.
Okay, Jan is retired. He keeps announcing his retirement, and then
it's many years.
We keep finding he's doing more and more stuff, consulting, executive producing. Anyway, there's nobody really more knowledgeable, I think, about the international documentary scene and field than Jan. So I have a ton of questions for him. We'll try and save some time at the end for your questions.
But let me start with a little, because this is a really important day for me.
Okay.
12 years ago, in 2012, I made a co-production deal for a filmmaker with a broadcaster, and for all kinds of reasons, they never paid me. In the end, we took them to court. This is like more than 10 years ago. And last year we won. And this morning I got paid. This is like a fucking saga. Anyway.
And here I thought,
so I got up this morning, I went to my email, and my assistant Johnny in Montreal sent me the notes that the money came in last night. Wonderful day, beautiful. I deserve a glass of wine.
Drinks around the house by Jan tonight.
Anyway, when Doug and I met, it was a very interesting period in my sort of career, because I used to sell at independent fiction films and documentaries. My background before in the Netherlands, when I was still in the Netherlands, was mainly documentary, but in the sales business, fiction and documentaries. And maybe at the same time, in 91 or 92, I was at one point with my colleague in those days, Catherine Leclay, who now runs Cat and Dogs in Paris. I was at the Cannes Film Festival, and we had a small independent fiction film in the market. And we were standing there, Catherine and I, and like 3 people show up at the market screenings. And the market screening was like at 2 in the afternoon, when everybody else is on the beach having lunch. 3 people show up, a journalist from Croatia, some distributor from a country I don't remember, and there was also this guy from the BBC who bought fiction films for the BBC, but he said, I can only stay for 10 minutes, but I'll take a look. So when this projection started, Catherine and I looked at each other, and I looked at Catherine and said, look, Catherine, this is it. I have enough. I will never, ever go to sell fiction films again. And from that moment on, I started to be 100% documentaries. I remember that moment as yesterday. Crucial. And then it was a very interesting time, because in the early 90s, things started to happen in the documentary world. The festivals that were there already a few years started to profile themselves better. There were the first documentary sales agents slowly starting. So everything came together in 93, 94. And then all of a sudden, on the world market popped up a number of big documentaries. And I was able to get a number of them. Doug's film, but there was also the Celluloid Closet by Rob and Jeffrey in San Francisco. There was the big Lenny Riefenstahl 4-hour piece, Channel 4 and ZDF. Beautiful film, Battle over Citizen Kane, by Michael Epstein and Tom, what's his name, Lennon. So all of a sudden, I was able, within about a year, to profile myself quite sharply as a documentary sales with some really, really good materials. And then I went to the festivals, and they were very well sold. So that sort of kickstarted the documentary part of my career.
So, Jan, let's backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
In terms of, there's always a lot of confusion, even among experienced doc filmmakers, of which there are many here today, over what an international sales agent does relative to, a U.S. sales agent that goes after, U.S. distribution. What are the key differences? What exactly does a sales agent do?
A sales agent finds sales, and the sales can be multiple fold, and they can be for worldwide, and they can be language territories, German language, they can be cinema included, can be all media deals, they can be broadcast only. Sales agent finds specific deals for specific media and territories. In the US, there are sales agents that only concentrate on the US because it's a big market and it's a market that has some money. Some of them also do international, like Rocco Films does some domestic work, but also international work. It's basically finding deals, finding sales over all the different media.
So when do you tend to come aboard? Do you go to festivals and find films there? Do you come aboard earlier?
Increasingly, we find that the sales agents, like the more important documentary sales agents, don't want to take a film if it's already released. They'd like to be involved earlier. Now, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. People do pick up films at film festivals, but generally speaking, we'd like to be involved early and be involved in that release. And actually, maybe that the filmmaker can use our contacts to create a festival release for a film.
So, what's the best way? I mean, there's, one problem that comes to mind is, if you want to come in earlier, the film isn't done, generally speaking. So what is it that you like to look at if some filmmaker is approaching you to come on while they're sort of towards the tail end of editing, maybe?
Ideally, an almost fine cut. That we can actually see what the film is, what's the arc, what's the story, does it work? Is it okay for its like 3-hour length, or does it need to be 88 minutes? That's the ideal situation. Sales agents also come aboard some way earlier, when they also probably start helping with the financing on it, finding some pre-sales or help with the pitches at the pitch forums. So I personally would go for. Like literally a few days ago, I said to myself, you know what, I'm not really interested anymore to hear pitches. I'd rather see work in progress, because work in progress situation is much more clear and much more concrete, and the help that we can give is much more concrete also.
Yeah, we'll get back to pitches because you have some very, very specific thoughts about how to pitch and stuff, and we'll get to some of those later. But what is it that you look for in a film? What are the kinds of films that pique your interest and make you want to get aboard?
I want to be engaged. I want to be entertained. And it has to be relevant. I mean, if I take on a film, it has to be relevant politically, socially, culturally. I have to feel that. It's very hard to say. Let me just think for a second. And of course, we have to have some kind of an idea that we can sell it. That's one of the issues there are today. For instance, there are so many films on the market that you can wonder if that market is able to absorb all these films. So we try to figure out what we think we can sell to the market, where things can work.
Mhm.
But they also have to like this film, you know. And but the thing with us, people like us, we have to work actively with films for between 2 and 3 years. That means that every time we talk to people, we need to have the same enthusiasm about this film in particular that we talk about. So if a film is very current, if a film is a very current, very topical issue, very political issue, then sometimes this time is much shorter. You can work with the film maybe for half a year or 1 year.
How
But,
many?
you know,
Oh, sorry. How many films do you like to take on in a year?
I think that most of the sales agents work in 2 time periods. Well, it's very simple: the spring and the fall. There are a number of festivals in the spring, a number of TV markets and other events in the spring, also in the fall. We tend to work with 2 slates. You prepare a slate in the fall for the next spring, and in the spring you prepare a slate for the fall. And what I've seen from my colleagues, we talk about between 10 and 15 films per slate. So let's say that if it really works well and there's activity in the market, between 20 and 25, 30 films that take on per year.
Mm-hmm.
Tendency is a little less over the years. I've seen in the past larger slates, but as the market is not so easy these days, people tend to be a little bit more picky and a little bit less films and spend more time on specific titles.
Mm-hmm. Now, a sales agent like yourself can't get a film into a specific film festival, but can you talk about how you might help a film get the attention?
It was easier in the time of the DVDs, because we could then actually phone the programmer, because we know most of the programmers. And we say, on your desk, there's probably this pile of DVDs. And mine is probably somewhere. Get mine out and watch mine first. Sounds a little simplistic, but a lot of people do it like this. This is way much more complicated now because of the links. So there's no more piles of DVDs, there's no more boxes with VHSs. It's a little bit less easy to manipulate. One of the big issues with festivals, I just want to say one thing about this, is that they are getting so many submissions that they organize teams of screeners. In the past, we joked and said they're being sent into a room with a box of VHSs, and you got 2 days to go through them. It's a real problem. That means that if you just enter your film in a festival administratively via the online, you will not really know at one point the real programmers will see your film. I have an anecdote on this, that there was a film a couple of years ago that was refused for ITFA. And I was a little surprised when the filmmakers actually contacted me after ITFA and said, well, we submitted and it didn't really work and we didn't get in. I said, what film is it? Okay, this one, this one, this one. I said, shit, really? I don't believe this. What was the stage of the film? I was almost done. I saw the film after ITFA in January, February, and I said, you know what? I'm going to try to get it back in ITFA. The film was going back to editing a little bit. And we got it into ITFA the next year. And I found out that the person who basically stopped the selection process a year earlier was not really aware of the person who was the main character in the documentary. It was a very well-known person. And it got stopped there. And the programmers themselves didn't get to see the film. So that whole process of trying to, either yourself or via help, to get the right people to see the film is really, really important. Also because of the incredible busyness of this whole landscape. And I've spent a lot of time to over all these years to contact the right people and make sure they see the film on time.
And then you might help with the timing of the screening of the premiere, the venue and the timing for that.
Sometimes that's not so easy because that is also done by people who I don't really know. These are not the programmers, these are sort of schedulers who put together the program. And my big argument is always from, look, I mean, I really need that Saturday night because the filmmaker only can be there on Saturday night. And I'll try to convince them that I'm telling the truth, which is sometimes not the case. Anyway. But it's I know there's stories about you're delighted to be programmed in Berlin, but you're on the last day. Okay, that means a problem. That means that in the live situation, the festival, most of the buyers will be gone. If you look at Berlin as a festival, the market really works from Saturday to Wednesday morning. But the festival goes on until the Sunday. You see, so it's we experienced sales agents, people who do have to contact these big festivals. We have a little bit of influence. We can help a little bit.
Let's talk about festivals for a second, since you mentioned them. Is it still the handful of festivals you want to aim for the premiere of the film, and then that will launch kind of a festival run of A-list festivals? Is that
it's still the same pattern as years and years. It's still the 4 or 5 launch pads, international launch pads.
Which are what?
We all know them. On the calendar, it's like Sundance, it's Berlin. There's the Toronto Film Festival in September, and there's ITFA, and occasionally Venice for a documentary, because Venice has a very interesting policy. They don't really make a difference between fiction and documentary. They say a film. This is a film, this is a movie. If we like the movie, whether it's a doc or fiction, we'll take it. But Venice occasionally, and very rarely, and although they are pushing for it, the Cannes Film Festival, which I do not believe at all. That's a complete waste of time for documentaries, but that's another story. So beyond the launch pads, you see in the spring and in the fall, a cluster of about 6, 7, 8 festivals that can carry the career of a film further after the launch pad. And if you do not get the launch pad, this is where you start. You pick one of them, like Thessaloniki or Lyon, the Vision du Réel in Lyon, there's Marseille, and you try to do as many of these festivals in the spring-fall cluster as possible, because that really establishes a career. And beyond that, there's 3,000 other festivals, and that's complete free for all. I mean, I'm not really interested in those festivals. Some of them are a wonderful trip, Bahamas, Canary Islands, but they don't really add anything to the prestige or the name or the career of the film. And beyond that is a 4th category, which is very interesting, which are the thematic festivals, which is human rights, which is green, ecological, nature, historical, arts and culture. And these are the festivals that attract specific clients. And that's my 4th category. So I would go for the 1st category, the 2nd category, the big 3rd one I skipped. I can give advice here and there, but I see sometimes festivals with films with all these little laurels on the poster, like about 50 little laurels of festivals I've never heard of. It doesn't mean anything for me. So that 3rd category, forget it. But the 4th one is interesting. Like the Jewish film festivals, the human rights festivals, the eco festivals are very powerful circuits, and they can really help a film into that circuit to be further distributed.
Jan, for the record, for people who'll see the video but aren't seeing the chat, let's talk about those 8 other. Most of us aren't, as much as we'd love to, get into the Sundances and Berlins. So you mentioned too. So let's talk about the other 6. There's CPH Docs. There's
let me go back for my agenda. There's let me check. I write them in my calendar. There's basically starts in March. In March, there's one of them in February, which is Dock Point in Finland, which I advise for the Scandinavian countries. And then there's Thessaloniki and there's CPH. There's for the arts film festival, arts documentaries, the Art FIFA in Montreal, which is a very good festival. Then you get hot dogs in the spring. There's a Festival de Riel. There's Docs Barcelona. So it's a couple of those, about 6, 7, 8 of them, good ones. The fall is a little more meager. The fall has, of course, IDFA as a big one, and TIFF in Toronto. But then it has Leipzig, it has Lava in the Czech Republic. It's a little less.
Obviously, if you get one of those top 4, you'd probably want to get a publicist. Would you recommend getting a publicist for those other 6, the ones that are just slightly that level below?
The thing with publicists is that a publicist only makes sense if you want to get something done in a territory. Like in a festival in the US, a publicist makes sense because you want to continue in that territory. You need the publicist maybe to help it. Publicist for a festival like Nyon in Switzerland or Docs Barcelona, what does a publicist then do there? Articles in a Spanish newspaper, that doesn't really help you internationally. If a film is actually bought in one of those territories before and gets then it's up to the distributor in that territory to maybe engage a publicist and use the festival as a starting point for the career in that specific territory.
Well, what about industry reviews like Variety or Hollywood Reporter or something that tend to cover those festivals? You don't need a publicist for that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think that look, they're all pretty active, Varieties and the Screen Internationals, and they're all over the place, and they've got reporters. Only if you want to spend some serious money to get the reviews, and you haven't had them yet from a place, maybe, but I'm just not so sure about that.
Okay.
So
let's
maybe it's more interesting to go to slightly more specific things as the Modern Times review stuff or other sites for the industry.
By the way, how actively do you work to get, yourself in getting reviews and press for these films?
Not me. The sales agents, they try to place the films in festivals, and then it's up to the festivals to create promotion in that specific territory. I've never really found maybe if ever I'm involved in an Oscar thing or something like that, I will maybe help the team to get that done. But I don't think that sales agents. I'm not so sure if I don't know. If you look at the broadcast market, which is still the most important market for all these documentary sales, they don't really care about Screen International, the broadcast buyers. I don't really think so. Maybe I'm mistaken.
When you bring up broadcasters, that leads me to a whole other area I want to talk about, which is sort of the state of the documentary industry and changes in the marketplace. Let me begin by you've talked in the past about living through 3 big tsunamis in your career. Do you want to take us through these 3?
The tsunamis. Yeah, okay. Let me just get. The first one is these are events that sort of completely changed the landscapes. The birth of video in the end of the 70s into the 80s. The regretted Julia Reichert, who passed away recently, came to Amsterdam in 1977 to my apartment with her film Union Maids shot on video. It was one of the first documentaries shot on video. Anyway, just a little anecdote. Julia has been a dear friend since all these years. Then in the 80s, mid 80s, started the so-called thematic cable channels. And the thematic cable channels, Discovery, History Channel, all kind of these thematic channels all over the place. and they bought like idiots. They bought a whole incredible, really a lot of films, also from the independents. So what if it dried up? It dried up because they started to realize that when they license something, they don't own anything. So that means they don't up the value of their what they have, what they own. And now, but these changes were relatively, how do you say that? The 70s, I don't remember. This is too long ago. Okay, but the cable, it was a relatively clear landscape with those cable channels. Now, the third tsunami is the digital market that is rolling over us, and which I feel personally still quite chaotic, with the exception of some major streamers that are very clear in their operating. Do I make any sense?
Yes,
Okay.
it makes sense. And we'll get to the question of how one possibly makes money, selling to digital platforms.
Yeah, but a little bit later. I think
Yeah,
that
we'll get to that.
no, but in the meantime, through all these years, broadcast has remained quite important in the market for documentaries.
Well, how aside from digital, how's the marketplace, the international marketplace changed? What are trends that you're seeing in terms of what your role is?
I think in the festival world that there are sort of two major tendencies that you see happening in the market. There's an increased interest in very current issue documentaries. Very current meaning that it's really in the zeitgeist, it's on everybody's radar, it's in the news. These are the Laura Poitras films are an example of this, and many other. And the film that just was in Copenhagen by Tonja Schei from Norway about praying for Armageddon and things like this. So a very, very current issue in feature format, but also in our format for TV marketer. Then the other type is very auteur-driven, very auteur signature. And I have a feeling that somewhere in the middle there's like a big hole at the moment. There's a lot of good films that don't have that urgency at one side and that sort of artistic signature. That's what I see happening in the festivals. Broadcast-wise, we've been stuck over the years with a decline in available slots for documentaries on broadcast, and that's become a real problem. And the slots, I call it a bit of the dictatorship of the slots. I saw in Thessaloniki a little presentation of a Greek producer with Christian Pop from, and they were showing a trailer or a pitch trailer, 4 or 5 years ago, that was pitched somewhere, and that nobody was interested in it. And recently they reworked the same pitch trailer and made it very clear what it was, and everybody bought it. In the beginning, it was not clear whether it was science, whether it was history, whether it was this. And so they really created that trailer looking at the available slots on the broadcast market, and then it worked. So that slot dictatorship, as I call it, has been very dominant is not the word, forcing many producers to conform to that type of documentary filmmaking. And I think that that larger TV market has also sort of grown away from the festival market and the other markets.
There used to be very few slots for the 90-minute feature documentary and broadcast. Are there
That's gone. That's basically gone. That's a real problem. It means any pre-buy you do or co-production you do with a broadcaster involved somewhere in the chain would require at one point the so-called 52 minutes, and the feature slots are on the regular broadcasters basically non-existent. On Arte, which is a specific broadcaster in Europe, it still has here and there some feature slots, but very, very little. So anybody producing for the market of a European market in general, those two different versions are totally required. There's no more discussion about that.
Right. And there are certain, digital rights issues that have been popping up. You mentioned Arte, right? Don't they demand digital rights for throughout Europe practically?
Well, at one point, the broadcasters started to create catch up online. It means that after a regular broadcast, a linear broadcast, the film was available for a few more viewings after that day of the premiere on the linear broadcast. That has grown over the last few years into fully available for 2 months or for 3 months after the broadcast. The sideline problem there is that the license fee you get for the broadcast doesn't really include that other viewing afterwards. Just one little more side and then I continue with. I saw a post a little while ago, a year ago, by an Austrian filmmaker who had his film on Arte, and he jubilantly declared on Facebook that his film, in the month after the Arte broadcast, had 750,000 views online in the German market. 750. So I texted him a little text back and said, wouldn't it be nice if you had like 25 cents per click? But this is a discussion which is going on now among the sales agents. We have a little group of sales agents and we talk about what happens. Why don't we get any money out of that second usage of a film after the initial broadcast? And little things will happen in that field, because if you sell a film for, I don't know, for 4,000 euros to Finnish television, and the Finns force you to sign on another 2 months availability online, where you get 30,000 people to watch your film for nothing, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were getting here to something else.
Yeah. No, it's
yeah,
an interesting discussion.
it's about Arte. Arte is now a broadcaster that originally covered France and Germany, and then covered also the German speakers in Switzerland, in Austria, and the French speakers in Belgium. And now, because Arte is a political decision, it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a political decision to make it into a European broadcaster. So about 2 years ago, I see an Arte contract. No, I get a phone call from a distributor in Italy saying, hey, wait a minute, that film was seen in Italy with Italian subtitles via Arte. So Arte was very, very slowly expanding its reach into other languages, Spain, Spanish language, Italian, Polish. And very gradually this happened. And people like us, we started to ring the bells because it would destroy other sales and distribution possibilities, not being paid for extra by Arte. And if you don't know these things, you'll sign those contracts and you sign away a lot of stuff. We, the experienced sales agent, we were able to stop that. But for how long we can stop this, I don't know. Arte is basically expanding according to its mandate. Its mandate was to become a European broadcaster. And that's very complicated because in the end, you'll sign away a lot of rights, linear and digital rights, for one fee for a lot of territories that you could have sold separately, directly, you know?
Mhm.
It's a bit of a puzzle, Arte.
Yeah. So we hear a lot about this being the golden age of documentaries. Personally, I feel it's a golden age for about a handful of filmmakers, but
Well,
do you agree? I mean, do you think it's a golden age, Jan?
well, I mean, I think documentaries they get more promotion and more publicity than they ever had before. But I have this whole list of little texts that I write, something that I use for my consultancies. That's this whole list, all these little texts. And one of the texts says, the title of one of the texts is, "Most films are not seen." Meaning that the enormous amount of film that's every year hitting the market via all the film festivals, etc., etc. How many will be picked up by broadcasters, where there's still a real audience? How many will be picked up by the sales agents, who are increasingly picky, increasingly selective because it's difficult to sell? So many of these films are not getting seen in the major channels, but then sort of disappear in the online world. So it's not easy. I find it. I mean, sometimes I say I'm quite happy not to be an active sales agent anymore, doing my rounds in the spring and the fall, because it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And you have to work very, very hard for your film to get it somewhere, float to the surface.
Do you think that's the biggest issue facing filmmakers now, trying to
Well,
get on the radar of festivals, sales agents, distributors?
It's a major issue, but I think there's something else very important, that filmmakers should increasingly start thinking about doing some of those things themselves, because they will maybe not find ways of getting their film out there. I read Peter Broderick's Bulletin 48 a little while ago. Now, where he goes into extreme detail of self-distribution. I found it very, very interesting, and actually very stimulating. Yeah. Because, of course, the case study that he put on paper, it was extremely well documented. It was also a case study of a film that has a very organized audience out there, mobilizable audience out there online. But the principle of finding audiences outside of the regular strands that are so under pressure, broadcasters under pressure, festivals filled up, I think is essential. I mean, I've been hammering to different training and pitch courses in Europe to pay attention to this. That filmmakers start to be aware, and some filmmakers will not have the energy or the wish to expend 2 years of their life doing self-distribution, but those who understand that it's an option should be able to learn about this. Yeah. I think it's very, very important.
Yeah. I'd also highly recommend the work of Keith Otchwat and Show and Tell.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. They're really smart about alternative ways of getting your films out, via partnerships and conferences and other means. So what is there anything you're optimistic about some trend?
No, I think it's the
optimism. Oh my God.
My God, I don't remember that word. No, it's okay. I find it still extraordinary that we have this incredible circuit collection of documentary film festivals around the world. And they used to be maybe in Western Europe a little bit, but they're all over the place. They're in Asia and Latin America. So that's a very, very good point. They're crowded. And many of them have money problems, continuously money problems, but it is there. It's something we all built over all these years, which is quite amazing. And that will eventually translate into documentary presses in the online world, in the digital world. I mean, the fact that platforms like the Water Bear and the DA Film in Europe, they're doing a lot of good work. And sorry, I need to get off some water. Excuse me. So I'm optimistic in the sense that over all these years, there is now an infrastructure. And if you as a filmmaker spend some time on it and you find the right contacts and the right connections, you can actually play that circuit. That's a good thing. But what I'm worried about is that the slow decline of broadcast partners. And if you look at the tables the pitch tables at all these events 10 years back, I mean, there were like 6 times more broadcasters around the table. And now it's only a small group of people. And
Why
it's
do
a pity because I think that, and also I have to say, the broadcasters are often in countries the deals that trigger funding. If you don't have a broadcaster, you don't get access to the funds. And that's maybe a little bit of an old system, but it's still there.
do you feel like there's more of an agenda among the broadcasters for the issue-oriented films as opposed to, character-driven stories, personal documentaries?
That's just going to slightly to a different. Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, if you have a film that's an urgent film, then they'll buy it. What the problem with the broadcasters is that there's a lot of what I see in the festivals around. There's a lot of social issue films, films about people with handicaps, social issues, poverty issues that are made in every country, and the broadcasters in those countries like those films for their own audiences. And international, and like the film about homeless people in Spain will not be sellable in Finland because they have a film about their own homeless people. These are the social issues, and festivals are full of these films. Festivals can play those films without any problem, but they're not necessarily sellable. The difference between and I hear since years and years and years from broadcasters the classic line, a domestic story always scores best. It means that the film about unemployed youth, wherever in the Netherlands, can score very high in the Netherlands because of the language, the social situation, etc. It will be unsellable in France or in Spain or in Italy.
So, given what you're saying, what advice do you have for filmmakers looking to do international co-productions to raise the funds for their
Well,
films?
first of all, if you start to develop ideas and projects, ask yourself the question whether this is a global story that may have global interest, or is this a story that remains domestic? I know a number of Dutch producers. I work a lot as a consultant for Dutch producers who very specifically think about this before they do something. And there will a number of films will simply remain in Holland. They will not travel. They don't spend the energy because they don't think it's doable. And they develop films that will travel. So they're thinking early on in the process what you want to do. And that determines the energy you're going to put into this and develop films in a certain direction.
So let's say you're convinced your subject matter will play universally and appeal to all markets. What's the best strategy for putting a international co-production together? Is it kind of meeting and getting to know producers from other territories? Is it finding a sales agent like yourself?
First of all, you have to ask yourself the question whether this specific production is apt for a co-production. Is there a reason to co-produce? Like there's a film maybe being developed in, I don't know, maybe here in Greece, and it turns out that one of the protagonists actually lives in the Netherlands. Okay, now you have a reason to maybe think about co-productions. So for me, that's the basics. I mean, is there a reason why to go into co-productions? Are not easy. They're complicated, they're long, and the administrative bullshit. So it has to be a very clear reason why you go into co-production.
But what about pre-sales?
Pre-sales, it's happening less and less because if you want to do a pre-sale, if you're a producer from the Netherlands and you want to do a pre-sale in Germany, the first question you get from the German broadcaster is, what about your own country? So do you already have your 80% financing ready? Because otherwise they will not even talk to you, because if your own situation is not in order. Pre-sales also have to do with confidence. I mean, the broadcaster from the other country that you approach for a pre-sale, if they don't know you, and if there's not an extreme urgency, or if there's not like an extreme exclusive access that you can offer for your film, they're not going to do it. Because pre-sales are a bother, because they have to go. The buyer has to go upstairs, has to defend to somebody else. Why do we need to have that pre-sale? Unless there's a real specific reason. If you have a unique story that nobody else has, and you are an unknown filmmaker, but you may have a good producer who knows people, then it's a possibility. But I see pre-sales, unless there's a co-production reason, the simple pre-sale from yes, I'll buy the film, it's happening less and less and less.
And then of course it gets complicated. And then of course it gets complicated by, streamers who want worldwide
this is not wine, this is tea.
Sure. It's 8 o'clock there, Jan.
Sorry, you were saying that?
Well, what about streamers and the fact that they would want worldwide rights? Does that complicates the picture because if you make a pre-sale, that kind of gets in the way, right?
It is complicated, but I think that situation of exclusivity was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, extremely rigid. If you make a deal with one of those big streamers, you could do nothing else. But now I see in Europe more formulas where, let's say, Netflix has a film, but also ZDF has a film in Germany. So there are now ways of combining windows. So it's opening up a little bit. I find still the problem with the streamers is I see that they are decreasingly actually buying licenses. They want to be part of the film, and they want to own it.
Right.
Exactly what happened in the 80s when the specialty channel decided, you're not going to buy anymore. We own the films. Now it's the same thing with Netflix. They want to own the films. So how that works, I don't have a recent experience with those shared window situations, but I can imagine that if the German taxpayer and German television is part of a movie and then it goes to Netflix, that the Germans have like half a year to air it before it goes to Netflix, something like that.
Yeah.
But there's more openness in any case than there was ever before in the past.
So we said earlier that we'd get back to pitching, and you have very, very strong opinions about how to pitch, and what the trailers, what should go into it. In fact, you sent a document that that Julie can put up in the chat as a PDF. There it is, with like 3 or 4 pages of notes on it. But why don't we go over some of the essentials you talked about? You talked about the importance of English subtitles.
Well, I mean, the thing is that the foreign audience always says, of course, like the Turkish buyer says, of course I speak good English, but they don't. So you don't take any risk, and you subtitle your trailers. Everything which is in English also subtitled in English. Anyway, that's just a small little one. I think I should talk about trailers and pitching. Is that
Exactly. Yeah.
If you create a trailer for an audience, you want to seduce the audience to go and see your movie and buy a ticket. But if you make a trailer for a pitch forum for broadcasters, for funders, for co-producers, it has to have much more information. So the seducing part is important, but it has to tell people also what the film is all about. I call these trailers actually a little bit more short demos than a trailer. And sometimes, I don't know, I mean, sometimes I see trailers during these pitch forums that don't give me any idea what the film is all about. Now, so did nobody tells them? What are these pitch trailers for? It is so easy to understand. You got 15 minutes airtime, in the audience there, and you got a couple of minutes to talk and a couple of minutes to show something, and then you show something that nobody had any clue what's going on the screen. I see so many of them.
So how long before a buyer like yourself or sales, needs to know what's going on? In other words, 30 seconds before you get impatient that you don't know what's
No,
going
no. I think that the purpose of the second type of trailer is to give is yes to make it attractive story, but also to give information. Now, if that needs to be 2.5 minutes, it needs to be 2.5 minutes. I always remember a pitch trailer. This is a really interesting story. Epstein and Friedman from San Francisco, they pitched 15 years ago. How many years ago? At ITFA, their film Paragraph 175, which is about the persecution of gay people during the Nazi period in Germany. Okay, so you can put together talking heads, you can put together archive footage and blah, 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 and make a fantastic tale. You know what they did? They actually took an older man live in the streets of Berlin to a street corner. And the older man was talking to the camera to Rob, who was directing it, saying, this was the street corner when in that days in 1934, I was going to meet my friend. And I turn the street corner and I see my friend being picked up by a little Nazi car. So I was standing there and watching this, and I went back. That trailer was not even 30 seconds, but it did everything. It was a magical moment that nobody ever forgot. So sometimes you find that magical moment, that really the opening sequence of the Real Dirt on Farmer John. Remember that film, that crazy movie?
Sure.
Opening sequence: Farmer John walks into the field. Sun coming up, start of the day. Farmer John sits on his knees in the soil, takes a handful of soil, takes the soil in his mouth, and says to the camera, the soil tastes good today. 30 seconds. Wonderful. Everybody who saw that beginning wanted to buy the movie. So you can actually find these incredible moments.
On the other hand, you can't assume that they will read. I mean, most people will see those trailers not in pitch forms, but being sent, and yet you can't rely on them reading anything about it, right?
You're totally right, because once you pitch once, then you have to send them out. So you cannot control the way people see those things. And you're not sitting next to the buyer when they receive it by mail, So it has to do something on its own. The examples that I just gave are wonderful to do public pitches, but sending them just on their own probably doesn't work. So that means that these trailers, in order to raise funds, in order to find co-production partners, they have to have some level of information, on style, what you want to do, but also on what's going to be in the film.
So even if it takes having a card at the very beginning saying this is a story about, or it is good because it then you don't have.
I'm not against that at all.
Yeah.
I saw a log line the other day. The guy Riyad, the guy from South Africa, Riyad Desai. He's doing a film on a local conflict, the David Goliath conflict in an outpost in South Africa about water. So he sends me a three-line log line that starts with, in this village, I read one line before saying very general information. Water is going to be a major issue in the world for the next years. So that gives you something about water, and then you go into the detail. Trailer is exactly the same thing. If he would have made his trailer only about the images of that village, I would have suggested a text card about water as a global issue. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm not against at all the text cards in a trailer, because it didn't give essential extra information, and can pull away the micro subject into a larger issue.
Any tips on live pitches, like one-on-one pitches? We talk about elevator pitches. If you get on the 12th floor, Jan, I have to the lobby. What do what?
Yeah, don't follow them to the toilet. That's the classic one also, huh? Don't follow the buyer to the toilet.
Oh, yes, yeah.
No. The classic one is what Nick Fraser always said. You know them, the 3 whys. He said 3 essential questions that you have to have the answers for. Why means, okay, why? Why do you want to do this? Then the second why is why now? Is there a certain reason why this film is being made now? And the third one is why me? Why am I the one who wants to make this film? These are the 3 essential questions that if you can answer these nicely or appropriately in a pitch, will save you an enormous amount of time. And they always work. These 3.
That's a lot to get to in 12 floors, Jan.
I know.
Got
No,
to
but
talk fast, right?
look, no. Most of these one-to-one pitches, there's a little bit of time, you know. There are pre-organized one-to-ones, and you sign in for them, and you know your schedule. There's always a possibility that you meet somebody in the bar afterwards, but if you organize yourself well, and you know beforehand who you want to talk to, then you can actually, you have a few minutes time to talk about this decently, you know, and without being sort of overhasted.
Do you also respond to the person, you know, their, like, who they are, their passion for it, you know, the sense that they're going to make this whether you come on or not, you know, is that a big part of the pitching as well?
Well, you have to create some confidence. I mean, if a filmmaker wants something done, either find production partners or find broadcast interest, or you know, I've been in discussions with filmmakers at different festivals where I walk away saying, look, these guys they're never going to do this, because you just feel that there's not enough either experience or drive or whatever. It's really important to create that level of confidence.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier because you have already made 5 films. But if your first film, or you know, then that's not so easy.
You've been pretty outspoken in the past about not being a fan of personal documentaries. Why is that? What's the problem with it for you?
Well,
As one who makes them.
Yeah, I know that very well. That's why we're still friends, Doug. No. Many personal films are with how do you call it, within larger sort of social contexts within a society or a village, and many of them are, for the reason I said earlier, will very difficultly travel. Because if somebody makes a film about her or his brother who has Alzheimer, there's a filmmaker in Spain doing the same film, or a film in Italy that's doing the same film. So I'm a little hesitant. Of course, there are always exceptions where films are so powerful or so intense that they jump out. But most of these films, and I see a lot of in the pitch forums, I see a lot of these personal films. And there's now at least 10 films out there somewhere about personal experiences in the Ukraine. Where will these films go? I don't know. You know, occasionally something will jump out because there's a filmmaker with a very strong auteur signature, or it's a story that has an angle which is so unique that everybody says, "What the fuck?" You know, a serious surprise. So anyway, I'm sorry. I've been a little hesitant in personal films, but I totally agree that occasionally there's a film that makes a difference, or makes a difference that has power, or whatever. Some of the films that you made, my friend.
Oh, Thank you.
No,
Uh,
I just to give you a little feather. I mean, I remember at the time that I hesitated a long time on 51 Birch Street. I said, "Oh God, another one." And no, and then I finally saw the film, and then I said, "Shit, I made a mistake. I should have taken that film because that film did make a difference."
yeah. Well, I think
Sometimes it happens.
also Diana Heltzberg was pretty instrumental
Yeah,
in getting it to you. So
yeah.
that was helpful. But thank you.
Anyway, so I'm a little hesitant about personal films because there's a lot of these films that basically tell the same story another time or once more, slightly different context, but basically the same story.
Yeah. So I have a few more questions, but I promised that we would give some time to folks out there who, there've been a bunch placed in the chat, but if you
Ah,
have a question for Jan, use the raised hand function.
I don't see the chat on here actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go through it if we don't, but please don't hesitate to come on camera and ask. So we'll get to you. Let me just ask a few very brief questions, and then we'll get to all the
Okay.
raised hands. John, we haven't covered short films. A lot of filmmakers are making shorts. Is there a marketplace for them?
Well, it's interesting because I see around me in the festival world more attention for shorts since about 4 or 5 years. Before there was just nothing. There was Clermont-Ferrand in France, and there was Annecy, and there was maybe 1 or 2 festivals, but they had a very almost like hidden existence. There's more promotion, there's more publicity, there's more attention from National Film Institute to promote their shorts. I see more and more festivals creating short sections in the programs. So there is something happening in the short sector, which is really interesting, which is
Do you
very
see
nice.
more outlets for buyers? Like,
Well,
can you
well,
make money on
but
shorts?
the second thing is that shorts, almost per definition, don't make any money because of the length. I mean, the broadcast market, which is still what I call the only non-speculative market. It means that they buy your movie and they give you money. If they would buy a short, they will give you $500, you know? It's always been like this. So that means that even though there's an infrastructure which is growing, which is very nice, and out of the short business people will make other films, maybe longer film features, which is very, very good. But the money part of it is abysmal. It's almost non-existent. That means that there are, I mean, I have a list of about 45 documentary sales agents, and there's only one dealing with shorts. There's one person there in that whole world that actually knows whatever market there is for shorts. But I had a discussion the other day with a Greek lady who runs the Drama Shorts Film Festival in the north of Greece. And she told me that within the circuit of short film festivals, there are initiatives being discussed about creating some kind of an industry section in those. So I think it's very interesting to observe that, the shorts market.
So speaking of money,
Money.
typical, I've always been curious about something. Your typical international sales agent, you know, the fees are generally 20 to 30%.
Something like that, yeah.
Whereas a US sales agent working that market in theatrical is 10 to 15%. What's the difference? What makes for the difference?
I've never understood that, honestly. The only reason I can fathom this thing is that maybe the Americans have access to buyers that pay much more money. That means that they can be content with a slightly lower commission.
Or is it because they're chasing theatrical mainly, or they used to, you know, go after the streamers and the theatrical distributors and make the big sale and then move on?
I don't know. I mean, I think at the time when there was absolutely were no streamers and there was no theatrical, people sold to HBO, Showtime, to Stars. They also went on 10% commissions.
Yeah,
Americans.
see, my feeling was always that you stay with the film for, you know, a year or two.
Well, okay, I hear what you say. I hear what you're saying. Yes, I mean there is an experience that many of the 10% people, they just try whatever they can do within about half a year or 3/4 of a year, and then they just drop the film. The European sales agents usually work actively with the film between 2 and 3 years.
Yeah.
And now maybe even a bit longer, because increasingly the established sales agents are now having staff on board that deals with the more long-term digital market.
Great, thanks. I will save a couple of brief questions for the end, but let's get to some of the raised hands. Rennick.
Oh, raised hands.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, Jan. Good to meet you. Thank you so much for your time. My question is, it's very hard to find a distributor for a small independent documentary, and you were mentioning bringing a sales agent on in the fine cut time period so that they can, be a part of the end of the film and right. Crafting the launch. But if I, along with maybe some other filmmakers, there's a situation going on where there's a distributor which has collapsed or has been sold, and so suddenly there's a lot of films out there right now that are searching for a distributor. And I guess
you talking about the thing that just hit the news a few days ago? This thing about what's the name again? Company? Yeah, I saw something on the
Passion River.
River? I think so. Yeah.
So I guess my question is how would you approach a distributor if you have a film that's already been released? It's basically a catalog film. Yeah, because if you're not happy with the person or the company that bought the company that you were distributed with, I'm curious how you go about finding a distributor when it's already hard enough to find an independent film at distribution at a launch, let alone as a catalog.
I hear you. First of all, a distributor is somebody who works locally for me. A sales agent is somebody who works internationally. So this company that now has all these films on the shelf, were they a local distributor, domestic US, or were they an international sales agent? That's the important difference. If they were an international sales agent, then to refine somebody, it's going to be very hard. The sales agents that I know in the documentary business, they don't really build catalogs because on broadcast, there is no afterlife anymore. There used to be occasionally a resale, but it's completely dried up. So the only reason why they build catalogs is maybe for the online market, for the digital market.
Yeah, and you've also talked frequently about having kind of an escape clause in your contracts.
Well, when I saw that news a few days ago, or maybe even this morning, I said to myself, you know what? Jesus. There is a classic clause in these contracts that says if a distributor either goes bankrupt or tries to sell the company, it cannot be done without permission, written permission of the filmmaker who granted them those rights. That should have been in those contracts.
Well, also you want something.
And the other thing is that if a situation like that occurs, that the company just goes belly up, whatever, then automatically, without further formality, films referred back to the filmmaker. Should be in the contract. That means that if the lawyers get all these contracts, they see that and return the films.
But you also don't you want a clause as well that if the film isn't performing, because if it's just sitting there in their catalog for a number of years, you also can.
That's what I advise now to filmmakers when I see sales agents and distribution contracts. I say to them, look, if they want the film for 5 years, I want you to build in an evaluation after 2 years. A good faith evaluation, meaning that if you want to go out, I'm in a situation now, right now, it's a film that I actually brokered with a sales agent and the filmmaker wants out. And that clause is in that contract. So we have the right to open a discussion between all parties where we would discuss if it's worth it or not worth it to continue. And I can guarantee you, that the sales agent, in many cases, would also be very glad to walk away. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a question. In all the sales agents, they know that building a volume catalog doesn't make any sense. So they will not stick to the film because they need volume. Doesn't happen.
Right. Jimmy, you're up.
Hello, yes. Thank you so much for your time, Jan. It's been and what you've shared. It's been really, really insightful for me. My question is I'm probably going to ask something you've already shared, but I just wanted some clarity. So you talked about the notion about personal stories. There's a risk that because they're local stories, the local audience may make it harder for international sales. So my film is called The Rise Firebird. It tells the stories of seasoned women of color in the UK who are pushed at the corporate world due to racism, harassment, bullying, and how they're rebuilding their lives. The story of their redemption and their rebirth in their new careers and recovering. We're doing we're kind of following the Peter Broderick, Keith Urquhart approach in terms of knocking on doors. And what we're finding has been with the organizations we're reaching out to, a large amount of interest from American and Canadian organizations in terms of wanting to see the film. Yeah. So is there something one could do? So I suspect once we kind of finish Show and Tell approach and PBS fun stuff, we'll probably have a track record to show that it's been interest of these kinds of stories about Black women at work has an international appeal. If we now are working on another film, is there some way, and I now want to try and approach someone like yourself or one of your colleagues, what would be,
Are you talking about making a new film now or this film?
Well, I'm thinking a new film, but maybe if there's runway with this film, I don't know if I have any runway.
Look, for the existing film, distributing it in the US and Canada makes a lot of sense because it's film shot there, made there, and it's there.
No, it was shot in England.
Huh?
It was shot in. I live in England, so it was shot here and filmed.
I thought that your last name was England.
But we're seeing disproportionate amounts of interest from the US. So we've only gone to American film festivals. The company's paying us to screen it. We're getting R from the US. So my thinking was actually finish kind of this run with this film rather than trying to convince.
I would advise you in North America to find a distribution company who can then take over from you. And do screenings and outreach, etc. Find an educational distributor to take over the film. And in the UK, do it yourself. I mean, you can talk to people like Sarah Mosses. You know Sarah from Together. It's a company.
I'll be honest, I don't know her. We've had almost no interest from the UK for this film, to the point of being implied I'm lying about it. So it's just very strange. So it's just weird, like almost none from anyone. And often it's been quite bad where we had.
The film was shot in the US or in England?
England, London. Picture law.
But you know what? Look, America is the only territory that has a structured landscape of educational film distribution. None of the European countries have that.
Yeah.
I tell you why. Because in the European countries, in the 60s and the 70s, educational film was run by ministries. Free. So there was no incentive for companies to start educational distribution in France, in Holland, and in Belgium and England. There's no incentive. In the US, it's very different. So if you can't find any interest in the US, in your own country, try with grassroots organizations to do screenings yourself.
No. I mean, in terms of where we are, just because we're a bit further on, my question was really more about how to present it to, I guess, international sales agents to show this film has such a legs. Because in the US, we have enough, I think financially, we've got enough pull from the United States. I'm satisfied to continue what I'm doing because we're getting enough financial pull. It's just more if I want to now work with a distributor.
The most important, the most simple filter is to approach the 10 key sales agents based in Europe and see if they're interested. I can help you with that. Send me an email. I'll give you the names.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
But the thing is that if they decide not to go for it, then you may have to take the decision to let it go. Because anything else will be very, very complicated and very, very labor intensive and without probably a lot of result.
Okay. Thanks, Jimmy. And thanks, Jan. Don, you're up next.
Thanks. Jan, it's good to meet you.
Hello.
And I wanted to clarify something you were saying earlier about when to bring a sales agent on. I think you had said when you're close to having it finished, basically
Ideally.
close to the fine cut. But then also in terms of a distribution consultant, when would you bring that person on? I'm in a situation where I'm nearing the end of production, filming, and what will I have to show each of these, the sales agent and the distribution consultant, to figure out whether or not we can work together?
Well, ideally, the cut that you have, if you have like a rough cut that you feel safe with to show, you show that.
Yeah, at this point, I'm just at string outs.
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. So you may get interest based on the idea,
Mhm.
based on your synopsis of what the film is all about, but they will take a decision a little bit further down the line. And if you want advice on distribution inside the US, well, then the consultants there, the Brodericks and the Keith, they can maybe help you. They
Right.
can maybe direct you in the right direction to who are the best people for this particular story to talk to. Internationally, you can possibly send out a synopsis to a number of sales agents, but it's probably better to wait a little bit further down the line when you have a decent cut. At a
Right.
certain point, you will have a cut that you feel okay with. Show around.
Okay.
Because
Great.
in the end, even if you have a good demo, you
Mhm.
may get interest, but nobody's going to take a decision.
Yeah, I have 3 versions of trailer right now, but it
See,
doesn't.
wonderful, but nobody's going to take a decision based on this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to, by the way, point Louise Rosen in the chat said something helpful. We do have a problem in the industry that the terms sales agent and distributor are used interchangeably.
Yeah, it's a bit of a
But as
problem.
Jan has suggested, and I would argue they're different creatures. Joanne, you're up.
Hi, thank you, Jan. This has been fascinating, very educational. Thank you very much for talking with us. I have 2 very short questions. One, I have a personal on-camera pitch that I recorded. It's only 30 seconds long. I like it a lot. Sounds to me like I ought to resurrect it and start using it, sending it around. And the other question is, I was approached by a distributor just yesterday. What questions should I ask them? And what should I know about?
Are you talking about a domestic distributor in the US?
Yes,
Okay.
domestic. And what question should I ask them, and what should I expect of that distributor?
Oh, there's a lot of questions you can ask these people. What rights do you want? How long do you want them? When do you want to start? You want to be involved in film festivals? What are you doing digital? Blah, blah. There's a lot of questions. And
Okay.
in principle, ideally, in a situation like what I sometimes say, just ask them to send you the template contract. Because in the template contract, you find all these details.
Yeah. And my other question is, I have a 30-second pitch that
Uh-huh.
I have rarely used, which I'm on camera talking about my film. Should I start using that again? And who should I send it to?
Well, I don't know. If you can, I don't know.
Jan,
Now, I'm just saying, look, and call them up and tell them on the phone or meet them.
but Jan, that begs the question: when you're approaching a potential sales agent, distributor, broadcaster, funder of any kind, in the initial approach by email, should people include a link to the short sample, to a pitch deck? What do you, or
I think so. I think so. If you in the approach, in the first approach, never send a full film. Send log line, teaser, clip, whatever you have, short synopsis. Don't send them a treatment of 6 pages. Nobody's going to read that. They have to click on the idea, on the hardcore idea.
What about a pitch deck? Do you?
Pitch deck is nice. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
It's a good idea, but don't make it like 36 pages. Okay.
How long is too long?
Don't put in there the biography of all your funders. Make it simple. I mean, it's about you, your immediate team that you built the project with, and it's a couple of pictures, and it's a link to the trailer, and it's a log line synopsis. That's it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Keep it simple, 4 or 5 pages.
Simon. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. You've already answered some of my points, but do you have any specific and particular advice for new directors with new projects connecting with independent production companies?
Well, but I think the most important thing is that if you do research about production companies, if you want to be, if you want to have a production company that will actually produce your film for you, find a company via their websites where you think your film fits.
Okay.
It's the same advice for sales agents. I mean, if you want, if you go with like a film about the Ukraine to the sales agent called Off the Fence, and you see they only have wildlife films, that's not where you go. You know,
Yeah.
The research is really important. The websites, they tell a lot. And the other thing which is important, if you find a sales agent or a distribution company that you like, see what kind of films they have handled in the last year or so. And maybe there's a couple of filmmakers you know, so you can phone them and ask them their experience.
Yeah. How about asking them out for a coffee if you live in the same city?
That would be very helpful, or a glass of wine.
Yeah. Okay.
Depends
Thanks.
on the hour of the day.
Okay.
I do that a lot. I mean, if somebody asks me for advice for a sales agent or a distribution company who I don't really know very well, I actually go to the websites, and there's a pretty good chance that I know one of the filmmakers or 2 of the filmmakers who are actually in that catalog, so I can contact them.
Thanks.
Ju.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jan, for really insightful conversation. So my question is about my personal dog. We heard your opinion about it, but we also know that, you know, there are good ones like what Doug Block has made. I want to get your reaction to what I'm doing. I feel that my film does have universal appeal. So it's a mother-son story. I'm the mom and my son. When my husband died 10 years ago, a cancer researcher died from cancer. My son and I, my son wanted to make a film to honor his dad. He was 12 years old. Prior to that, I already made him a star, like a child prodigy, you know, doing movie reviews and later animation. Our film was Oscar qualified. And then, but the story centers on our relationship and the evolution. So through that whole 6-year filmmaking process, our relationship transformed. I changed from a tiger mom to a Zen mom. So it's a parenting story. And so also my son interviewed a lot of celebrities.
Ju, sorry to interrupt. Can we have so limited time. Can you get to
so I want to just ask you like a reaction. Do you think this
it's very simple. All these personal films, you have to bring them to a point that people can actually see them, whether it's a rough cut or almost cut, whatever, because before they will never take a decision because they don't know you and they say another film like this, but you have to bring it to a certain point where you can show it. And then maybe with some help, you can get some people to see it and maybe move it further. But anything before, you better just concentrate on making the film to a certain point where it's viewable. And
Yeah.
make them not that long. I mean, 120 minutes is long. Like 85 is nice, 75 is nice. Because
Yeah, it
sometimes,
would be.
because the other thing that the visuality of these personal docs is sometimes not that great. The rooms and the gardens, it's not that, you know, exciting unless you're in the mountains somewhere.
So would you be interested in seeing a trailer later on?
No, because I'm not in the sales anymore.
Oh,
But
okay.
I can. But if these films should really be done to a certain point when you can actually see them. I can then possibly advise some sales agents to take a look at it.
Mm,
And Jan's email was put in the chat. So
okay.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
yes, you'll be inundated, Jan.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Do you mind, Jan? We're right at the edge of our time. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Philip, who will be one of our guest experts in 2 weeks for our AI session, has a question.
Hail the robots.
Yes.
Yeah, just two real quick questions. One, I just wanted to understand, because based on answers you've given to a couple other people here, I just want to make sure I have this right. Are you saying, Jan, that a rough cut is really the first phase of the filmmaking where you can reliably begin to obtain a sales agent? Right. Okay.
Unless you have an idea and a certain extraordinary exclusive access that nobody else has,
Right.
then people can start talking to you.
Right.
But generally speaking, a decent rough cut that you feel safe to show is really the best option you have.
Right. I appreciate it. And then my final question is sort of a bonus question. I'm just curious, is there a genre of documentary or type of documentary that you think does have a decent chance of being sold globally? For instance, in fiction film, science fiction and horror, what they call genre pictures, can be sold globally. Is there, I don't know, music documentaries or anything like that that you think can be for a global
Well,
audience?
I mean, if on one side of the spectrum are the very current films, you know, films that deal with issues that are now. I mean, when Dan Partland made his Unfit about Trump,
Yep.
I took on the sales, and one of the last films I sold it everywhere.
Oh, right on.
So it's a very clear situation.
Yeah.
Anything else? I mean, there are more on the other side of the spectrum, the more auteur-driven films need festival recognition. They need reviews, and they need accolades. They need awards or whatever to get sold. I just want to say something about the arts. Films on the arts has become really, really complicated. Most of the countries do not have that weekly arts slot anymore. They're just being cancelled. That means if you, I mean, I was working with a British producer on a documentary which was done on Boris Karloff. People refuse them because they say nobody knows Karloff. So it has to be very, very well-known people. There's only very few slots. Maybe American Masters sometimes, who deals with more exclusive type of characters. I'm now working on a film. I'm doing the international festival launch of a film on Vermeer. There's a huge exhibit in Amsterdam on Vermeer, which is the biggest one in 60 years or something. And it's a documentary about the building of that of the exhibition. And there's a lot of interest in that because that exhibition went press worldwide, everywhere.
Yeah. Another genre we didn't talk about is the vanity celebrity documentary.
Yeah, well, sadly enough, the dumb broadcast buyers go for this shit because people want to see that shit. I'd be following some of the stories about the celebrity documentaries who are actually executive producer on their own celebrity film. Now, big deal.
Does it? Do you feel like, you know, the rise of the streamers, you know, has upped, you know, the production value to the point now where they all kind of look alike, you know, with
very much so.
Yeah. Is that a problem for you, seeing the all the drone shots, all the dolly shot interviews from several angles and things like that.
Look, if it's functional, I have no problem with it. But if it's just for the, I once every 3 or 4 weeks, I go to the documentary page of Netflix and to see what they have. And it's just decreasingly bullshit, decreasingly junk, trash. And when I see at the same time that all these European festivals, they still sort of admire what's going on in these big streamers, they should not have reason to admire them, because that's not what they do.
Yeah. And
I was very distressed by the news a few days ago that Lisa and Ian were sacked from Netflix. I mean, they're the only two people who had some kind, and I'm wondering what happened to the other good people in the different countries now working for documentaries for Netflix. Anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. Well, speak of, what are your favorite documentaries of recent years? Non-films transit documentaries. Which ones have knocked you out?
I should have made notes about that. I should have made. Oh God, I don't know. I really liked the Danish film, the Leonardo case, Da Vinci film.
Mm-hmm.
Because I personally really like investigative documentaries, not in the sort of the cookie cutter TV style, but a little bit more, a little bit more breadth, a little bit more style. I like films like that.
Yeah.
I also really like The Octopus Teacher, although it was completely organized, that film. But that's another story.
Yes.
Anyway.
Okay, final question. This is kind of a general one out there for, and it kind of brings up things that we might have overlooked talking about, but for those what do you tell up and coming producers in terms of, in this very unsustainable profession of ours, what advice do you, typically give them?
The best advice is if you want to do something beyond your own little scope, do research. There's so much information on the internet. There's so much information about distributors, about sales agents, about festivals. Read. And if you have a plan, an idea, try to figure out where it would fit. That's the best advice.
Yeah. And you might find other films have already been made about the same subject. Or
well, that's another thing. I mean, if that's and the other tip is for instance, if you look for a sales agent, look for films that are around the same type of subject as yours, and see what their career was, and see who sold them. I mean, if you want to do a film on something happening with the Palestinians and the Middle East and Israel, there's been a number of strong films about these stories over the last 5 years. Find those films, find who sold them, because if you have an idea around the same sort of lines, the people who sold those other films are probably the best people to know,
right?
Because they know where the market is.
Right. Find out who funded them too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've often given advice about, maybe you should think of doing a website rather than a documentary.
Sometimes I say that indeed, because making a documentary 2 or 3 years of your life, if you don't have reasonable funding, it's like a fucking schlep to get it all together. And maybe you can reach more eyeballs via a website than via your documentary.
Yeah, spend a lot less money.
The how do you call it? The people dealing with the issues in your film are sometimes really well organized on the web. And they have long email lists, and they can anyway. The web is a fantastic means of getting stories out there. Also,
there's also YouTube channels.
I'm a little too old for that.
We've dealt with that on the D Word. It's on our own YouTube channel, is one devoted to YouTube channels. Anyway, thank you, Jan. This has been great.